I think we've got about 15 minutes, so it's not the longest time in the world, but a lot of ground to cover. Before we kick off, I just want to take some time on behalf of the ADGM team just to say to everyone, thank you very much for supporting us throughout Abu Dhabi Finance Week, and it's a great pleasure to be doing this interview with Ron. So today we're going to talk about how State Street, one of the world's biggest, most important asset managers, are approaching the topic of transition finance. Asset managers really influential in trillions of dollars of capital deployment every day, and it just so happens that the experts say that we need trillions of dollars of capital to mobilize into climate finance projects. So I guess what we're about to hear today is a very important perspective. We're joined today, everyone, by a very special Finance Week guest. He's a giant of corporate America, the chairman CEO of the legendary State Street, 227 years old, I hope that's right, and $4 trillion of assets under management. Ron O'Hanley, you're very welcome to ADGM.
Well, Chris, thank you, and it's good to be here. This gathering is very important, and the topic that we're about to talk about, I think, is vital, and Her Highness, I think, set us off and talked about why it's so important that we get this right. So it's a very good and important conversation to be having.
State Street, as I said, one of the world's most important institutions. We need to talk about your approach to sustainable investing. Let's start. How has the landscape, political, market, economic landscapes changed over even just the past 2 years? And how have these changes affected your investment strategy and how you think about this?
Well, I think the political landscape has changed a lot over the last 2 years. I mean, that tends to happen when you have something that's going to take a long term and something that's not easy. Politics does start to shift and change, and we're seeing it both, really from all sides of the spectrum. You've got, in some cases, the people in a certain side of the political spectrum saying you must divest, you can't be investing in these industries. In other places, you've got what, for lack of a better term, is climate deniers. I mean, for us, we have been at this for a long time. As you know, Chris, our clients are large institutional managers, large institutional investors. They take a long view because their liabilities are long term. They might be running pension funds, they might be sovereign wealth funds, but they're thinking into the future. And if you think about climate we think of as an investment risk, and it's got to be incorporated into the investment risk framework. And it's not just a downside risk, but it's also an opportunity. As noted by Emmanuel, there's an enormous amount of investment that needs to occur to get to where we need to be. That's opportunity. And so for us, we think of it, there's two real principles here. One, it's about value, not values. We all have our values, but for us, it's about value and protecting the value of our investors. And then secondly, it's about this point that climate is a very long-term investment risk, but it's also a very long-term investment opportunity. And let's see how we can bring those together.
Let's stay on that word risk, because I think that's pretty central to everything here. Money managers manage risk for their clients. What does State Street do to assess and manage the risks? What are the risks? What sort of concrete actions are you taking to actually assess and manage these risks?
Well, we do a couple things. First of all, as an investment manager, we have completely incorporated it into our investment risk framework. So we think about it now like we think about other risks, such as interest rates, right? Yeah. Such as any other kind of big macro risk there. Secondly, we also have a business where we help other investment managers. So we've created tools. For example, we have a tool now that helps asset managers, portfolio managers evaluate the carbon intensity in their portfolio and determine, is that something, with that knowledge, is there something that they want to take or not do as a result of that? So this is about tools and data in that case.
Yeah, I think when you say there are tools, it's about innovation, it's about technology. I think that's, obviously going to be a really big step forward. And, obviously we're in the age of big transitions in technology, and you're going to see a lot more of that stuff. you're here in ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Market, the International Financial Center of Abu Dhabi. I don't know if it's your first time, but if it is, you're very welcome, and it's good to have you here.
Well, it's not my first time. In fact, we've got an office across the way.
There you go.
Yeah.
We're a financial regulator, and we have, as Emmanuel mentioned earlier, we've taken some solid steps in the field of transition finance. We've done things like the region's first sustainable finance regulatory framework. We're home to the world's first regulated carbon exchange. But this is Abu Dhabi. You travel the world a lot, I guess. And as you travel the world and view different jurisdictions, what's your advice on how policymakers, regulators can ensure both the pro-growth approach to the net zero transition planning, and how do you do that with your clients?
Well, I think it's important, and Noel mentioned this in his video, that there's an enormous amount of capital that needs to be marshaled to this problem. And I don't think the problem is lack of capital. It's how do you mobilize it, and mobilize it in an effective and efficient way. And I think that's what regulators need to be thinking about. And in some ways, ADGM is leading in the world on this, because it's almost a twofold mission you have. One is you need to protect from bad behavior, but second, you need to foster an environment where this can occur. And I think the unfortunate problem with many regulators around the world is they're too focused on decarbonizing portfolios as opposed to decarbonizing the atmosphere. And this is why this idea of divestment makes no sense to us, and it's never made sense to us. If you decarbonize a portfolio and then say to somebody, your portfolio is X, it needs to go to Y in terms of carbon, what have you accomplished? I mean, I suppose the portfolio has gotten greener, but is the atmosphere have any less carbon? No, it doesn't. So I think recognizing that the job that we have here is decarbonizing the atmosphere. One critical way to do that is investing in the high emitting industries. So this idea that we're not going to invest in oil and gas, we're not going to invest in steel, we're not going to invest in concrete. In fact, I would argue that over the short to medium term, disproportionate investment needs to go there, at least to mitigate, but also to find new technologies, right? Concrete's not going away, hydrocarbons aren't going away, but how do we think about new technologies that can actually make them better? So if there's one message to regulators around the world, stop focusing on divestment.
Fascinating. When we finish here today, we're on the 30th of November. It's a notable date because it's the opening day of COP28, some 70 miles down the road. I know I, like many others in the room, are going to jump into cars after this event today and go down to Dubai for the next 12 days. At COP28, we're going to hear a lot about the energy transition. Can you explain to us why you see the engagement of the biggest institutions like State Street and others as completely necessary for the energy transition? What strategies do you see as the most effective for that?
Well, I think the financial institutions are there because they are the providers and mobilizers of capital. So part of it is to understand the problem, but second is to understand how you bring investors and projects together. One of the big challenges that we're facing in this arena is that it's not so much lack of capital, as I said earlier, but how do you bring the right amount of capital to projects? For example, in many cases, projects are small, yet institutional investors need to invest at scale. They can't actually be deploying money in 100,000, even in 5, 10 million. So how do you scale projects? Secondly, there's certain risks that investors are willing to take. There's other risks that they aren't. So this concept of blended finance, and how do you think about bringing the multilateral development banks and private capital together to come out with better solutions?
It's a very good point, and it's about collaboration. So we designed RACE, R-A-C-E, Regulation, Awareness, Collaboration, and Ecosystem, R-A-C-E. I think that collaboration, I know Emmanuel mentioned it earlier, is pretty important. It's about partnerships at the end of the day, and we only make progress when we work together to try and achieve something. We're in Abu Dhabi, capital of capital, as we call it. We have 3 sovereign wealth funds here. I'm sure you and State Street do some work with some or all of them. Sentiment amongst asset allocators like sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and others seems to be changing. As I say, we've 3 sovereign wealth funds here. We're at COP staging activities with the likes of the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund Network, and we're really spending time learning about what they're thinking. What's your view on the changing appetite from your customers, from your asset allocators, like sovereign wealth funds, and how do asset management companies like State Street need to act in the short, the medium, the long term to prepare for their changing appetite?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I necessarily agree that sentiment is changing on the part of sovereign wealth funds, but I think that the expectations that have been imposed on them are perhaps unrealistic. I mean, sovereign wealth funds have a fiduciary duty to something, right? If it's a pension fund, it's for their the pension beneficiaries. If it's a traditional sovereign wealth fund, it's for the future. So the idea that the money can just be made available for anything is simply not true. So I think that it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Sovereign wealth funds are looking for ways to effectively and efficiently deploy the capital. They're looking to take on and really, I think, quite ambitiously take on risks that they can tolerate, but there's certain risks that they can't. So this gets back to this point about how do you have the right partnerships in place so that those, if you will, first order risks that an investor like a sovereign wealth fund can't take are taken care of. Because then you get the multiplier effect of capital. And too often we're in the situation where the multilateral development banks and sovereign wealth funds are almost competing with each other when actually there can be layers of capital brought. The multilateral development banks can leverage their capital and extend it much further with the kind of private capital brought in by the sovereign wealth funds.
I guess super interesting, and I guess a final question for me, because I can see we're starting to run out of time. Are we where we should be? Are we doing enough? And how fast is it going to move over the next 5 years?
So it's a really good question because are we where we should be? No. And part of that is because the world didn't start soon enough. So there's much more that we need to do. But I also think it's very important, and I'm not being Pollyannish here, but we should recognize what's been accomplished. So, one fact here that isn't really talked about too much, but if you go back to 2015 in COP in Paris, the view was that peak carbon would occur sometime around 2040. The view now is that peak carbon is probably going to occur before the end of this decade. So that by itself doesn't mean anything, but at least it means that we're no longer adding to the problem, right? That we're going the other way. So part of what we need to do is recognize what we've accomplished, to have fact-based, science-based, non-political discussions in terms of what we need to do and look at solutions to get there. Now, again, I'm not Pollyannish. Politics will always be part of this. But as much as possible, we need to recognize where we're actually achieving things and specifically what we need to do in terms to close the gaps.
It sounds like we're going in the right direction, at least. And we have 38 seconds left, and I can see the stage managers ready to get us off. But here's to our appreciation for you coming here, joining us, and we're hoping for real progress over the next 12 days, and we hope that State Street are a big part of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Cheers.
Take care. Thank you.